To Natalia and the team, congratulations, both on your one-year birthday, but also on the critical role that the Ukraine Crisis Media Center continues to play in helping to tell Ukraine's story to the world. It's my enormous pleasure this afternoon to introduce the Deputy Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Deputy Secretary Blinken has been one of the real champions of the U.S. partnership with Ukraine during this extraordinarily historic period, and we're honored to have him here with us today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Pyatt, and thank all of you. It's very, very good to be here. I arrived in Ukraine last night, and the first thing we did was to visit the Maidan. And that visit was a reminder of the extraordinary sacrifices that the Ukrainian people have made and their extraordinary courage. And it was both humbling and inspiring. Today, we've had a series of important meetings, including a very also inspiring meeting with members of civil society and new members of the Rada. And what we heard from them was a very clear commitment to moving forward with the reform of this country. I discussed with the Prime Minister, and we'll have the opportunity to see the President later, the extraordinary work that they did together to act on the very important package of prior actions passed by the Rada in order to secure additional support from the IMF. It was a difficult thing to do, a politically challenging thing to do, but the right thing to do for Ukraine and the future of this country. One of the great challenges that Ukraine faces is making very difficult decisions in its reform program, knowing that there may be some short-term pain for people, but there will be long-term gain. That if Ukraine takes the steps that it's committed to and that are outlined in this package that was approved by the Rada, over time, things will get better. People will feel it in their daily lives, and the future of Ukraine will be more and more strong and secure. The United States is committed, together with our partners in Europe, to working with the IMF to make sure that the support for Ukraine is forthcoming and continues. I have to say, too, that something that gets lost sometimes are the extraordinary strides that Ukraine has made over the past year and a half in the midst of conflict, in the midst of aggression, to move forward. And it's work that's incomplete, but it's important, I think, to recognize it. Of course, the signing of the association agreement with the European Union. 2 successful elections, free and fair, despite being under siege. And then undertaking already deep and comprehensive economic and political reforms, including laws to enhance transparency in public procurement, to reduce government inefficiency and corruption, to clean up Ukraine's energy sector, to make the banking system more transparent, and measures to improve the climate for business and to attract foreign investment, to create a new anti-corruption agency, to strengthen the Prosecutor General's office. And now the Rada is also moving forward on political decentralization to give Ukraine's regions more authority in advance of local elections in October. So there's a strong track record of progress and reform. The challenge, of course, is to translate new laws into actual reality, to implement what's been agreed to and passed into law by the Rada or agreed to and authorized by the executive branch. I also very much appreciated a clear message from the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister to Ukraine's commitment to fully implement the Minsk agreements and the Minsk implementation plan, including unimpeded access for the OSCE in order to do its job. There are 3 critical steps that are necessary now to move forward on Minsk: a ceasefire, access for the inspectors, and a pullback of heavy weapons. And those obligations, unfortunately, have not yet been fulfilled by Russia's proxies in the east of the country. Let me conclude with this. The United States is deeply committed to Ukraine's future and to its success. And there are a few reasons for this. First, we've been committed to a project in Europe for several decades, and that is to build a Europe whole, free, and at peace. And if Ukraine is not whole, if all of its people are not free, and if the country is not at peace, Europe won't be either. And so it's very important that this conflict end and that Ukraine find the peace and security and sovereignty that it deserves. But second, even beyond this European construction project, there's something very important happening here. There is something that is greatly at stake. And that is the rules that we are trying to establish for international order into the 21st century. Those rules are under threat and under challenge right now by Russian aggression in Ukraine. And those rules are straightforward and they're simple, but they are vitally important. First, the proposition that when it comes to a democracy, its borders cannot be changed by force from the outside. If we allowed that to stand, it would set a terrible precedent, not just here, not just in Europe, but around the world. Second, the principle that in a democracy, the only people who have the right to determine its future and to make choices about its future are the citizens of that democracy. No outside country, no outside power, whether it's the United States, the European Union, or Russia. Only the citizens of its country. And again, that's a proposition that we need to defend and stand for. Third, when countries make commitments, international commitments, they need to keep them, otherwise the whole system falls apart. And as all of you know very well, when the Soviet Union dissolved and it left successor states, newly independent states, 3 of them, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine, inherited nuclear weapons. And Ukraine made the wise and brave decision to give up the nuclear weapons it inherited. But it understandably said, we want assurances in giving up these weapons that our territorial integrity and sovereignty will be protected. And 3 countries gave those assurances: the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia. To allow Russia to ignore that solemn commitment, in effect to tear it up, would set a terrible precedent, not just here, but around the world. And indeed, at a time when we're working very hard with the international community to convince Iran to forswear the pursuit of nuclear weapons, that precedent would be a very unfortunate one to let stand. So for all of these reasons, our commitment to Ukraine itself, our commitment to the European construction project, and our determination to stand and defend the rules that need to be established for international order in the 21st century, what's happening here is of great importance to the United States, and it's why we're so committed to Ukraine and its future. Thank you.
Колеги, запитання?
Nick Shitko with the Wall Street Journal. Ukrainian President Poroshenko recently told that Europe has premature optimism about the state of the ceasefire. So do you agree to that? Do you see that Europe is being overly optimistic on what's going on in the East? Thank you.
That's not my impression. I was in London, in Paris, and Berlin before coming to Kyiv, and met with senior counterparts there. And no, I think our European partners are very clear-eyed. They have, as we do, the experience of the last year in which we've seen the Russians and their separatist proxies make commitments and then do just the opposite. So I think they're looking very closely and very carefully at what the separatists do and what Russia does to make good on the commitments that it agreed to in the Minsk implementation plan. So that's certainly my impression from talking to my European colleagues.
Колеги, чи є ще запитання? Дякую. We have no more questions.
Vasyl Marchenko from Ukraine Crisis Media Center. I have a question about the sanctions on Russia. Is there a discussion to actually raise the level of those sanctions on Russia, especially in the light of Crimea, because it does look like Crimea will be returned in the near future back to Ukraine. Does it mean that the sanctions on Russia will be based permanently, will be imposed permanently? And also maybe you could elaborate on the U.S. contribution to enhancing military capabilities in Ukraine. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. When it comes to sanctions and additional pressure, we've been very clear, our European partners have been very clear. If Russia and the separatists fail to make good on their commitments in the implementation plan and the entire Minsk process, if there's additional aggression in eastern Ukraine, then there will be more sanctions and more pressure exerted on Russia. And let me be very clear about this. The purpose of these sanctions and the purpose of this pressure is not to punish Russia, it's not to diminish Russia, it's not to pull it down. It's in response to Russia's actions in Ukraine in an effort to convince Russia to change its approach and change its policy. That is the reason for the pressure, that is the reason for the sanctions. And I think what we've seen is a very significant effect already on Russia and its economy. That economy in many ways is in free fall as a result of the sanctions, the fall in oil prices, and mismanagement of the economy to begin with. We've seen capital flight from Russia more than $150 billion over the last years. We've seen foreign direct investment go to pretty much zero. The ruble is at an all-time low despite Russia spending more than $100 billion to defend it. The credit rating of Russia has gone to zero, to what we call junk status. Growth has gone from about 2.5% to negative, so Russia is actually in recession. Across the board, Russia has paid a price for the actions it's taken here, and our hope is that it comes to the conclusion that it's not worth the price and that it changes course. And if it does, if it makes good on its commitments, if the separatists make good on theirs, then that pressure would be removed, the sanctions would be removed. However, Crimea, as long as that illegal occupation lasts, there will have to be a price paid for that. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in Crimea, beyond the illegal annexation of it, is the fact that the rights of many of its citizens are being abused on a regular basis. Tatars, those who refuse to give up their Ukrainian passports, LGBT community members, and others are living very, very difficult times in Crimea, and hopefully the international community will pay attention to that. With regard to security assistance, I think, as you know, the United States has already provided about $120 million in security assistance to Ukraine. We're looking at additional requests. We have additional money that's been provided by Congress, and we're working very actively on those right now.
Колеги, ще запитання?
Any other questions? Liga Business Inform.
Ірина Шевченко.
What is about providing weapons to Ukraine? How is that issue being discussed or what?
Thank you. One of the things we're considering is the question of defensive lethal assistance to Ukraine. That's something that's under active consideration, but there's no decision on that yet. Again, I think it's important to note that what we've been doing over the last year is to provide an extensive amount of defensive support, security assistance to Ukraine. I think that's made a real difference in helping Ukrainians protect themselves against aggression from the separatists or from the Russians. This includes things like protective equipment, night vision goggles, counter mortar radars, armored vehicles, bomb disposal equipment, etc. And that's made a difference, but we're continuously looking at what more we might be able to do to help Ukrainians defend themselves against aggression. And as I said a moment ago, this is something that's very much on the table right now.
Прошу наступне запитання.
Олександр,
Yes. Could you please tell what's your assessment as to perspective of bringing in peacekeepers to the east of Ukraine?
Right now, the most important institution that can play a role in monitoring the commitments that are made under Minsk is the OSCE. And they're already playing the lead role. I think it would be important going forward to increase their capabilities and their resources to do that. Whether there are ways in that context for the United Nations or the European Union to get involved, that's something that we're looking at. But I think the focus should be on strengthening the capacity of the OSCE to do the job that it's agreed to do in monitoring the requirements and the commitments under the Minsk agreements.
Mr. Blinken, Anna Honcharik, Ukraine Crisis Media Center. We have a question here about your vision with regard to United Nations in its current form, where one of the countries, the members of Security Council, is actually an aggressor for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been, as you know, within the Security Council and the permanent members of the Council, there are not infrequently differences in approach to various problems. One of the benefits of the Security Council is it offers at least a forum where at least sometimes we can work through those differences of approach. But even more than that, it offers a forum where if one country is acting in a fashion that clearly is in contradiction of the basic purposes of the United Nations and the Security Council, which is to advance peace and security, that creates an opportunity to put a light on it and to shine a light on the activities of that country to demonstrate that what it's doing is in total contradiction of the very purposes of the Security Council and the United Nations. And indeed, in the context of what's happened in Ukraine and Russian aggression, there have been a number of occasions in which there have been open debates among the Security Council members, and I think it's been very apparent to the entire world that Russia is isolated in terms of its actions in Ukraine. And we've heard not just the United States and not even just Europe, but other countries represented on the Security Council make clear that in their view, what Russia is doing in eastern Ukraine is unacceptable and holding them to account. So I think it can actually play a very useful role in putting a light on actions that run counter to the purposes of the United Nations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Колеги, ще є запитання? Останнє запитання.
The last question.
Ligostova. There is a dispute between two parties. They say there is a dispute in Washington. One of them say that if Ukraine will have this little weapon, they will be defensed better than now. And the other parties say that this conflict could be aggravated more than now. Which party prevails so far? Thank you.
Well, I think you've actually characterized well the nature of the discussion about these things. Look, the bottom line is that there's not a military solution to what's happening in eastern Ukraine. There has to be a diplomatic resolution. And so, on one level, the provision of weapons is not the way to get to a solution. Unfortunately, however, the only people who seem to believe that there's a military solution to eastern Ukraine are the Russians and the separatists, and they need to be disabused of that notion. So we will continue to look for ways to disabuse them of that notion and to advance a diplomatic solution. And then the question is, can that best be done by the provision of different kinds of security assistance? Can that best be done by increasing the pressure through sanctions on Russia? Can that best be done through diplomacy? Or is it a combination of all three? And that's exactly, I think, what we're doing and what we're looking at, and we're constantly reviewing how we can, in all three of those areas, maximize the chances for success, which is a resolution of the conflict, an end to the conflict, and a restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Mr. Blinken.